Welcome to Christian Authors Community. We are authors helping authors. We get together once a week and have a roundtable discussion about how we can use our platforms to further the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you want to learn more about what we do or how to join us, head on over to our website at authorscommunity.net. Let's jump into today's meeting.
Kim and I have both had some experiences, and maybe you have too, with writing nonfiction and possible type of fiction that you may encounter legal issues using names or photos or, giving information that some may not be okay with you giving. So we were going to share our experiences with that. I know Kim has some. I have one in working with another person, and I have some for myself. So I don't know, Kim, would you like to begin?
Sure, that's fine. I can.
Okay.
And I want to just tell you that I did a little research too, so I'm going to read a little bit too, because I kind of intrinsically know some things, but I thought, why don't I look on there and see what I can figure out? So I'm just kind of going to do a little reading and then give you some examples. And we're talking mostly about nonfiction writing, but then I will make some references to fiction using characters that maybe are an amalgamation or not in your life if you write fiction. So this is from an attorney I know, and sent me some stuff, and then I got some stuff from internet too. I'm just making sure I say that because of copyright infringement, which we'll discuss. Nonfiction is a dangerous genre, according to them. A nonfiction author can incur significant legal liability unless a proactive approach is taken. So if you're writing fantasy or fiction, that is not necessarily considered grounded in the real world, okay? So nonfiction deals with real people, real names, places. So it creates an environment basically for legal issues, right? There are 5 areas we're going to kind of talk about, or I'm going to run through that they kind of go over. They are defamation, copyright infringement, right of publicity violation, breach of contract, and trademark infringement. And a couple of these are probably more what I've seen dealing with as a publisher than others. Defamation, as you know, libel or slander. And in the end, it means you've said something about someone who is alive, and that's important to remember they're alive because there are other legal issues that deal with people who are dead. What you've said is both objectively bad and demonstrably false. Okay, so the person who you're speaking about, there's a strong possibility they could be damaged by your statement. So if the statement is true, then it's not defamation, okay? No matter how offensive or embarrassing it is to the person. But that's where the little catch comes in, proving that it's true and not your opinion. So defamation deals with a false statement of fact of an identifiable person. A defamatory statement must contain sufficient information to lead a reasonable person other than the target to that target. So you must be able to read it and identify that person from reading it. Okay. It is published, which means at least one other person has heard what you have to say. Okay. And it causes reputable harm, either in that person's life or work. Okay. It can cause public hatred, ridicule, contempt, negatively affect their business or their occupation. So that's defamation. Okay. And by the way, stop me if you have any questions, because I was going to kind of run through this and then give you some examples of how to what to put in your work so that you can avoid some of this. Copyright infringement, and we all get into this. It's a double-edged sword, because I don't know about you, but I've had people use my work on websites. I've had people use my work, sell my work for huge amounts on the internet that I have nothing to do with. And the question is, I mean, infringing on my copyright, because every book of mine is copywritten, and that's all in copywritten in my work as well. When I send out something, I send you all forms. If I say I have a form for that or whatever, you'll see on most of them there's little copyright, KS Words Publications, or Mimosa Lake Press on it. So I stamp on there that it's copywritten, okay? But as we know, copyright infringement occurs when you post or reproduce something of someone else's work without their permission. So the following 3 questions as a writer you're going to think about are, will I get caught if I use this person's information? Will I get sued? Okay. And what is my defense for that? So that's in dealing. Copyright can be not only written word, posts, of course, and any use of any pre-existing work without permission. Okay. That is not public domain. Okay. Is copyright infringement. The right of publicity violation is everyone has a right to their own image and to not have their name exploited, their image, their likeness. That is called right of publicity. So that you have this right. Nonfiction authors who refer to real people in their work use their names, images, likenesses in their books without permission. And we'll talk about releases in just a little bit, could be exposed to a lawsuit for a right of publicity violation. Unlike defamation, most right of publicity lawsuits can survive beyond the death of the person. Okay, then they give some examples of what states have. How in Indiana it's 100 years. Okay, in New York it's forever, and so it's just it just varies state per state what that is. The 4th and 5th are breach of contract, and I'll just talk a little bit about this. As a social worker that dealt with, clients, high-risk people, mentally ill people, I had to sign a confidentiality agreement. Some of you may have had to do that in work that you've done. Some people may have had to sign a non-disclosure agreement if you've worked for a company. So if you are writing about, if I would write about any of my former clients using their names or their situations that were very, very close to what their real life was, I could be in breach of contract of that confidentiality agreement. So if you have signed a non-disclosure or a confidentiality agreement, and you're writing nonfiction about something around that time, your time at work, whatever, you're getting into dangerous territory there, because that's considered a breach of contract, or can be. And then trademark infringement is the last one, and that's when you use somebody else's trademark. I use the Disney logo on the cover of one of my books. Okay, so to sell my goods and services, you're not allowed to do that. Okay, so that's considered trademark infringement. Anybody have any questions about those 5 categories at all? Okay.
I have a question, Kim, actually.
Sure.
On the copyright infringement, I'm assuming it wouldn't, but does it make any difference whether the author has registered their copyright or not? Because, I mean, if you write it, it's copyrighted, it's yours, but if you have not registered, does that make any difference, or does it change the situation any if you have or haven't?
It might make it a little harder to prove, but even if you've registered your copyright, what you're in essence doing or needing to do is keep your process so that you can prove that work actually is yours. So even if you've registered and you've copywritten the work, that's what's piling up in my office and in my garage are all of these processes, and that's why I put work into edit copies relatively quickly and get them out so that I can show a process of beginning to end of how I created that work. So if you're dealing with someone who has not purchased the copyright for some reason, but they have that proof that they created that work, you're still going to be in trouble, Yeah. So, so better to just avoid or get permission.
It looks like Cynthia and Paul have questions.
Cynthia, go ahead, babe.
You said there were 5 items. I only got 4. Can you list them again, please?
I can. Defamation, copyright infringement, right of publicity violation, breach of contract, and trademark infringement.
Thank you.
Got him? Okay, all right. So, let's see. Who else had a question?
Paul has his hand up.
Sure, go ahead. You can't get it. Okay, if you get it unmuted, then let me know. Who else had a question? Phil, did you?
For trademark infringement, doesn't it have to be a registered trademark before it's an infringement, instead of someone just making up something and using it as their trademark?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question, but we can check that out. I can check that out. I don't know. If it were me, Phil, honestly, I would stay away from it. I mean, I would, but does the trademark have to be registered is what you want to know. I can find out.
Because otherwise, would they have a case against you?
Well, if you're using it commonly, and they can produce a history of I've used this, I've used this.
First proceedings or something it's called.
Okay, all right. So maybe you know more about it than I do. So tell what you know on it.
I've already said it. I don't know. All I know there's such a thing as a registered trademark, because I looked into that for my years.
Yeah, know what you mean. So I mean, I think if it's on something that I just wouldn't want to go there. I tend to be very, very cautious because I don't be drugged into court, so, but I'll check that out. I can find that information out.
I was just curious because I
know
a couple of times.
Anybody else? I see another hand up.
Paul, did you get unmuted, or Wendy had a hand up?
Okay.
I don't know if this fits in or not, but as you know, my primary biblical studies. I quote people, but I always identify who it is. I can't get in trouble for that, can I?
If you identify if you're quoting,
identify.
You're naming your sources, right? Yeah. So then,
okay.
And we'll get into that more. But yes, you're naming your sources and you're giving credit to your sources. Okay. So yeah, if it's
I'm very careful about that.
Yeah. That's one of the things they suggest.
There are people that are better theologians than I am. Probably Joe's one of them. By the way, hi, Joe.
Hey, Joe.
I could have got into trouble with the publishers of the NIV Bible because I was quoting it in the fourth prayer. And although they say you can quote 500 words, I think
500 verses.
500 words.
Verses, yeah.
500 verses, yeah. Without needing their permission. When I check that further, if it's used for commercial, then you cannot quote 500 verses. If you're getting paid for it, then you have to get their permission. So then I had to do a quick about face, and I went in and made the correction and changed everything to either the New Living Translation or the King James Version, for which even for commercial you don't need permission, as long as at the beginning you state that it is, acknowledge that all quotes are from where they're noted. So I had to put 2 acknowledgements in the beginning and the front, but that way I was covered. But I very nearly got caught with that because I thought I was okay quoting 500 verses, but nah. And I hadn't attributed them beside the quote, which you have to do. So it was a quick about face, but I thank the Lord for print on demand. I was straight in there and changed it.
And I'm
came
guessing
up with that. Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to say I came up against the same thing, and I do have scripture from NIV in one book particularly. And I read the same thing, even through the publisher I was with, up to 500. However, I did always put in parentheses the scripture reference and NIV. And I did put in the front of the book copyright for them and the date, the whole thing, their copyright.
Mhm.
Hopefully that covers me, because I had not known as far as you read.
Yeah.
But
And
I'll use a few others too, but they're all copyrighted in the front. They're attributed
On-
their own copyright.
Right.
on most books, you could get away with it, but apparently the NIV are particularly who's the publishers for the NIV? I can't remember. I looked into it, but apparently they're one of the worst for prosecuting. So, yeesh, careful. I just decided, no, I'll just put the NIV aside and use the New King James. And of course, the old King James, anybody can use that because that's been around. I think that's out of copyright by now, I think.
And that's a really
wasn't,
easy assumption to make because, because some Bible versions are in essence public domain.
Yeah.
The King James is. So you could make that mistake. So yeah, what are you going to say, Nancy?
I always have to look back, Steve, but it wasn't Thomas Nelson and Zondervan, was it? For NIV?
NIV is now owned by, I don't know if it's Penguin or one of the big New York publishers.
Okay.
And that's why their copyright is so nasty.
Okay.
And they just absolutely are horrible about letting you use their translation. So it's just easiest, like Steve said, to just plain stay away from it. There's tons of versions out there. Find another one, because almost all the other ones have that 500 verse rule.
Well, I thought the World English Bible was in public domain. Anybody hear me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not sure about the translation.
I know that the more you get into
Did you say King James Version? I did not think it was in public domain.
What I know of it is. I didn't say it is, but it's like public domain that you can use it without. I always attribute, but
Yeah.
You have to. The safest thing is to attribute is to make sure that you credit the source.
Right.
Whatever way you do it, and I do it at multiple.
Well, I always do that anyway. Like in my biblical studies, like I use the World English Bible, and I make a note at the bottom that all scripture passages are written in the World English Bible and web, in parentheses. But you say I can do that for the King James Version? I don't get in trouble?
I know.
The King James or the New King James, it's just the New King James. Obviously, you have to put in parentheses next to it that it's the NKJV. And at the beginning, there is a copyright that you have to write in. You can copy and paste it. You can find it on the internet, copy and paste it onto the, I think with the New King James, it has to go in the acknowledgements. And I think the New Living Translation had to go on your copyright page. I might have got them the wrong way round, but I put them both. I went out where I used both translations. I put them both on the copyright page and both in the acknowledgements just to be on the safe side. But
well, some translations, in the past, I know that you only allowed so many verses that you can use. Period.
Yeah.
Is that still true?
Yeah.
500. Yeah.
But the New King James you can use as much as you like, as long as you do attribute it, and it is for commercial purposes as well. So the New King James is not a bad one to stick to if you like the translation.
Well, it's a little bit easier to understand than the King James, just because the other one's archaic language.
Yeah.
And
Phil?
Randy has a question too.
Yeah, Phil.
Well,
did you?
Kim, quick question here, because I think this applies either to fiction or nonfiction. If you paraphrase what someone else has written. No, in your own words, kind of giving it your own spin. Is that some sort of infringement?
If you stated your opinion or your translation, and I'm going to get into disclaimers that I put in the front of my books in a few minutes, and then that might be able to help you determine that too. If it's very closely quoted, I would credit anyway,
Yeah.
and I'd credit in the back as a source and then interpretation. But what I'm going to read to you shortly will help, and I'll publish this with the blog that we're going to publish too, a couple of these disclaimers so that you can paraphrase, but you're crediting your source. Okay. Think of it as writing a research paper. For those of you that have been in college or high school, or you do not want to step too far into anything that's not an original idea.
Right.
Was there somebody else hands up that I can't see?
Wendy, did you still have a
Yeah.
question?
No, I'm good. Well, my question was kind of like, with a website, we get domain names, and that should take care of anything where, I use my website for everything now. So the name, that's covered under protection when you pay for the domain name, right?
Well, you own the domain name. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Like I
just
own
wanted to
mine.
clarify.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Kathleen?
What about landmarks? Would you acknowledge the state that the landmarks are, in, or as if you're describing them, giving a little history on it in a fiction book?
In a fiction book, you're a little safer. Okay. With that, and the disclaimer I'm going to give you will help with that too. But basically, if you're using some private place that's not a public place, I would disclose, that's but like Mimosa Lake, people believe it's Melody Lake out here. That's where I live, and it's a lot, but I mean, it's,
Yeah,
I have a disclaimer that basically says this is my imagination. And I'll read you the disclaimer, but basically it's the author's imagination, and so I just claim, even in my fiction, I put a disclaimer in everything. It's my imagination, impression. It's not the author's, it's any, anything that looks like someone, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not reading the actual language, is, purely coincidence. It's a work of fiction or it's a work of law. Okay. Phil?
I'm done.
Okay. Anybody else?
Back on mute.
Okay. Hi, Sue. Oh, hey, Sue. How are you?
It's all right. Hi.
Just to say, in my memoirs, I changed names and places so no one could be identified unless I had permission from that person that I could use their name. So I contacted friends, but anybody else, I'd change their name or the location they were, so they couldn't be identified, just to be on the safe side.
Sue, go ahead. Thanks, Steve.
Hi. So I just have a question. In regards to like writing your testimony, like I'm recalling missionary stories. Like if you were to write your missionary experiences in a foreign country, let's say, or travel stories, these legal, I'm just kind of wondering how much of this is going to affect legally if you were to publish your missionary experiences, let's say, or your travel experiences.
Okay. Let me jump ahead and read this disclaimer, and that might answer some of your questions. Okay. So I'm going to read you a couple of disclaimers and see if this helps you at all and in your writing, because every work is going to be a little bit different. And then I'm going to come back to invasion of privacy and blah, blah, blah. Let's see. I don't use this disclaimer, but I'm going to read you 3 of them. The first one is, unless otherwise indicated, and you put this at the first of your book, and I can put these where people can get the 3 of them I'm going to read. Unless otherwise indicated, all the names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents in this book are either the product of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. This is for fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. I have a writer that I'm using this book of his. I published a lot of stuff, and he's a Missouri history writer, okay? So he writes about Missouri history, but he does write about people that are living. And they are real stories, but he puts kind of a country porch spin onto his work. So in my publisher's note for him, this is the disclaimer that we use, because he is using real people and he's using places. The contents of this book have been created from the author's research, memories, and imagination. All names, places, characters, and incidents either are a product of the author's research or memories. The reader should not consider this book anything other than a work of literature. Some reference may have been previously published, and these references are credited to the source by the author or are public domain. Okay, so that's what we use for his book. So that would cover you, Sue, as far as that goes. You're looking at memories, you're looking at your impressions is what you're saying, okay? The third one I'm going to read you is an anthology. It was the book I wrote about my nephew's death. And what I did was in getting it, oops, how does that look good in the camera? That way.
There you go.
There we are. Anyway, so this is a book where his friends posted. I took Facebook posts. I took letters that he wrote me. His friends and family wrote letters to him. There were photos and Facebook posts of photos on there too, as well, about him and his life, okay? So what I did was, because I was dealing with people that knew they were going to contribute to this book and they were only going to get a copy of the book, the financial proceeds from this book go to fight drug addiction, okay? So they knew they were not being, quote, paid for their contribution in that sense, other than a book, okay? So I got a release form. I wrote release forms and I had them sign that they were contributing to this book in this manner, that they released us to publish that, okay? And that they would be paid with a copy of the book, but that they understood that the book proceeds were going somewhere else. Okay, so here's the release, or here's the publisher's note from that book, or from this one. It's an anthology. The contents of this book were created from the contributing author's memories and imagination. All names, places, characters, and incidents either are a product of the contributing author's imaginations or are public domain. The reader should not consider this book anything other than a work of literature. Some of the works in this collection may have been previously published and since modified from initial publication. All photographs and/or letters are used with the permission of the photographer and/or submitting writer. Each contributor retains all rights to their work within. And then the editor's note says, in order to leave the submitter's voice, grammar, spelling, and word uses intact, the submissions in this book were largely left unedited. So, which I put in the release too. Your book, so misspellings, there are misspellings that people made that are in there, and that covers that. So does that answer some of your questions a little bit? Can you see kind of the trend of you're using the author's imagination and memories? Okay, you could also put opinions in there. So Sue, when you're talking about your travels, those are your memories and your opinions that are there. Where I would stay away from is if you signed some kind of with your missionary work with whoever sent you, if you signed a confidentiality agreement, then you need to be careful about who you're talking about and the circumstances that you're talking about them in. So that would be my suggestion to you. Nance, do you have anything you would say on that?
Well, in my experience and with a client, I think we've tried to cover everything. Like even if we were quoting, if he was quoting a person, we're making sure he asks, "Can I use your quote?" You know, I mean, some of his are travels, mostly just to Hawaii, but he's naming businesses, he's naming people, he's naming situations, he's naming a lot. And even if somebody said something and has a quote, they may or may not want that shared, you know, is my opinion, at least with his books. So we're taking extensive measures to make sure everything is okay, or the names are being changed, just like Steve said, names and situations. And some desperately do not want to be mentioned or known, and others are like, sure.
Right.
But I think that, I mean, as working with him and my name is part of it, I want to make sure we cover everything, and he
Right.
does too. So we're still in the process of working some of that out. But I mean, really, I think in almost every situation, he's looking for validation or that or permission to use, and even in writing.
Right. Yeah,
So.
you need to get it in writing if you can't use
Mhm.
those with your documentation of your book development. So Cynthia, do you have a question? Your hand is up on my little board. No?
Yes, I
Yes.
do. I just had to get my mic.
Okay.
So what about these disclaimers? It seems like can we isn't using somebody else's disclaimer a copyright violation?
Well, I modified mine. I write mine. I mean, I've taken a certain set of information that is out, that is is listed, and of what you do with from publishing houses, and then so I guess in a way, I guess it kind of could be, but I use those disclaimers and write them. I write my own so that I can say to you, yeah, this is common information and knowledge, but it's not Penguin's disclaimer. It's not Random House's disclaimer. It's my disclaimer for my publishing company or for this particular work. So, but there are points of commonality.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's only so many ways you can write that short disclaimer.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you
I mean,
write it and without realizing, write it yourself, and you've written almost exactly what someone else has written.
Yes.
Mhm.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
if you're concerned, do what I did, run it by my attorney. I mean, I ran it by and said, is this, and he, of course, has legal language, and I said to him, okay, so I can modify this so that it's understandable English, Matt, and he's like, yeah. So run it by an attorney if you're concerned about it, because I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one on Thursday morning meetings. But I mean, basically, it's just kind of, if you're in doubt, run it by. It's worth the, $30 or $40 you have to do it to make sure. Shimri, did we answer you okay?
No, well, sort of. I was just wondering about stuff that's kind of pop culture, like talking about Trekkies or, stuff like that. One of my ships is actually called the Enterprise in one of my books, but it's because that group of colonists going on that ship were, a lot of crafters and business people for the colony. And each of the ships was named beginning with the letter E. And so Explorer was the first one because a lot of the scientists and stuff were going to go to, and then, I've got the Enterprise, the Endeavor, the Esperanza, and the Escargot is the last ship.
Yeah. Yes.
Shimrit,
So go ahead, John.
So hey,
Shimrit, I've had dealings with Paramount and Viacom many, many years ago because I do a lot of Star Trek art. And trust me, when you make your first 1 million books, they'll be looking at you. Just like Disney. Disney's probably the top of the list as far as they're always looking for any kind of violations or anything. If Viacom or Paramount feel that your book infringes with that name, which, Enterprise is the main thing with Star Trek, and the fact that they're not making the bucks from it, they'll definitely be writing you a letter.
Change it.
The thing that I was concerned about is, well, that when I looked up the laws on trademarking and stuff like that, they said that it couldn't be a word that was common English word. You'd have to change the spelling or something. So I was looking at that and going, the word enterprise, I mean, that's a common English word. It means business,
Yeah, but
Can you add an S?
to me, a ship named Enterprise, I'm going to say to you, Captain Kirk, and I'm not even the,
Shimrit, no,
How about adding an S?
I think
Enterprises.
okay, I think you're probably going to be okay. As long as you don't imply that as being the USS Enterprise, implying Star Trek or anything, you should be okay, because I mean, there's there still is, I think, an aircraft carrier named Enterprise. There's lots of things like that. All I know is when it comes to intellectual property, even when I used, when I did the Star Trek paintings and things, just using their uniforms or one of their communicator pins or something, if it, it infringes.
Right.
At least that's what I was told. So,
Gotcha.
but I wouldn't actually worry about it at this point. Like I said, until you make your first million, I don't even think they'll look at you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on so that we can move on a little bit here. And then we can go back for more questions. And I'm glad this is something you all are interested in. I really am. People aren't. I wanted to talk just a little bit about invasion of privacy, because I'm dealing with a book right now that this is pertinent for. Invasion of privacy claims, if you publish a book that is the truth, you can still be sued for invasion of privacy if you disclose private information that's embarrassing or unpleasant about an identifiable living person, that is offensive to ordinary sensibilities and not of overriding public interest. And that's important to remember in this kind of thing. And what I'm talking about right now is a book where a person is a victim of some things, and so they're writing a book about their experiences. Okay, so if the information is highly offensive, the courts will often decide there's no legal liability if the information is of public interest. Public interest does not mean highbrow or intellectual. Gossip, smut, or just about anything about celebrities is of public interest. Frequently, courts find in the cases stories of rape or abuse or incest to be of public interest if they are disclosed by the victims. But needless to say, if they're disclosed by the perpetrator, they're not of public interest. Okay, so in any situation, writers should try to get releases from people who will be recognizable in their work. Okay, if you cannot get a release, consider changing the person's names, identifying characteristics, circumstances, and this is permissible even in memoirs, is what he says. So, what to do with this information? Avoid plagiarism. And I do want to say something about this because it's been coming up again and again with us. I have a writers group in Washington. One of my students started, I've told you this, that some of the younger writers write a lot of fan fiction. And basically, fan fiction is just simply taking a story that's out there and then writing your own story around it, using those characters, using those circumstances, and putting your little story into someone else's story. I have never understood, but then I'm old. I have never understood how people get away with this, because I think about like Pharrell Williams' lawsuit from Marvin Gaye's family. And do you all know what I'm talking about? He used some notes from Marvin Gaye. So it happened several years ago. Pharrell Williams used the same note arrangement that Marvin Gaye had in one of his songs, and it talked about wanting to use that rhythm and that beat. And Marvin Gaye's family sued him and won. It was for the one about the, I don't know. Anyway, it was one of his songs that was fairly popular, and they won for just a few notes. So I don't want to go to court for anything like that. That's me. So avoid plagiarism if you possibly can. Credit your sources. Credit anyone that helps you if they want you to. Avoid defamation. When in doubt, make it fiction. Copyright your content, and remember those ironclad contracts that you signed. The first and simple rule is if you write about what a person, if what you write is positive or even neutral, people don't have a case, basically. So when you're getting into writing, dicey circumstances or situations or character attributes is when you have an issue.
Can I jump in there, Kim?
Go ahead. I'm done.
Are you? Okay.
No, I'm not.
Well, just let me jump in for a minute. That is one side of it I was going to address. I mean, there is the whole thing about using names, using places, using business names, getting permission for all of that, and the things we just discussed. And then what Kim just brought up is something I've dealt with myself. If you are writing, sharing somehow a story of your own life, but you don't want to, or you have the choice not to name anyone. You have the choice not to mention the state, not to mention the city, not to mention the names, to make it vague, to where you're still telling your story without incriminating somebody else who maybe had a large part in what went on in the story you're telling. But you know that by using their names and giving too much information, that these still living people could get upset and volatile about it. Now, if somebody's reading your book and they don't know you and they don't know your life, and I mean, they're just reading it. But if you have living people, including your own family or friends or, children who know you and read it, they're going to put it together in their head anyway, because they lived the story too, maybe. But if you're not, and you're being very careful not to disclose too much information, you can protect yourself. But it does make the writing kind of tricky, because the two particular stories I wrote, they weren't the whole book, they were chapters in a story. One, I remember my daughter saying, "Mom, I kept waiting for you to say what exactly happened." But the whole point of the story was not what happened and why it happened, but how I worked through it and how God helped me through it. The whole purpose of both of those stories was, as I said last week, I think to somebody we were talking about it, the purpose was how that was dealt with and overcome in my own life, and with God's help, how he dealt strictly with me, not dealing with the wrongs or what I perceived as wrongs or the actual wrongs that other people might have done or been involved in. Because what would be, in my mind, I thought, what would be the point? They could just say it's my word against your word. I mean, there could be some court documents that would substantiate my side, but it wasn't, in my opinion, and my stories there, worth even bringing up any of that detailed information. And I didn't have to have it to tell my side of the story. But it is tricky, because as you're writing, you are like holding back truths and things that you might say to make it more clear to a reader. So you have to make it clear to the reader without those details, and let them focus in on what you're trying to focus in on. And that is a whole nother side to the tell-all, the memoir, any nonfiction, that where you're just avoiding all of that. And I'm not sure which is easier, because on one side you are trying to get a lot of permissions, you are trying to stay clear and clean in what you use, but like my client, he needs all that to tell his story, and wants all that to tell his story, where I even suggested to him maybe just leave all names out, but that doesn't work for him. And so he's gone the whole route of getting the permissions with written permissions that they mail back to him that he can keep. We've changed a bunch of names. But there's like two sides to it. How I see it in my life is doing it that way if you can and want to, and go through that effort, or writing it in a, I don't want to say more vague way, but a way with fewer details that maybe don't really matter to the exact focus and point of what you're trying to say. So that's just a whole nother side, and it kind of goes along with what you were just saying, Kim. But go ahead.
And that's a good segue. And then, Shimri, after I read this little list, we'll get to you, okay? That's a good segue to what I'm going to say, because I have a list of how to limit your risk that he wrote. And that's the first one on it, Nance, is don't say someone is criminal, sexually deviant, diseased, or professionally incompetent, or use labels such as crook, cheat, pervert, corrupt, etc. Instead, stick to verifiable facts and your personal emotional responses. Remember the adage, show, don't tell, which we all talk about in writing, and let your readers come to their own conclusions about the situation and what happened, okay? That's the first one. Be cautious about saying something like, don't do business with this company. Tell your experience about it, and then leave it to the readers to get their own message from it. So that vagueness, that's the line you're talking about, Nance.
Yeah.
Is that vagueness like that. And remember, readers are intelligent people usually here, so they get it. I'm just going to go down this list and then we can discuss, okay? If you base a fictional character on a living person, mask the identifying features, change the physical details and the life history so the character is not recognizable. The more villainous the character, the more changes you need to make. Use parody and satire. If what you describe could never be true, then it's not a statement of fact. That's how The Onion, all know The Onion website does that. Keep in mind that memories are subjective and tend to evolve over time. Verify and expand your own memory by conducting research and interviewing with others. Retain records to support your statements. When speculating, be clear you are taking a guess. State that it's your opinion when it's your opinion. Do not state that it's a fact or imply that it's a fact. Get written consents and releases whenever possible. This is a big one for me. Think about the small players in disclosing wrongdoing. Think about who you're harming that could be an innocent bystander in your work. Consider how important the private information really is to your story. Do you need this private information or this set of circumstances to tell the overall mission of your story? Does it fit in? Rely on publicly disclosed information, court records, newspaper articles, court filings. If you're writing a get even book, you get back at a parent, spouse, boss, ex-boyfriend, someone else who made your life miserable. Write it with passion. Put it aside for a few months or a year. Then you'll be better able to mask your characters or make it a universal story. Better yet, wait until your target has passed away. Privacy. How important is your story, once again, to this private fact? Don't assume no one will ever go after you because you have no money. That kind of assumption ends you with getting served at your front door. Don't use anyone's name or images for advertising purposes without express permission unless that person's been dead for over 100 years. Add disclaimers, which we talked about. If accused of a defamatory statement, consider publishing a retraction. Engage an attorney to review your manuscript if you have concerns. Always reach for the truth when writing. It's the best defense. That's it. So I just thought those were really good guidelines and worth our time. So now I'm done. Go ahead, Nance and whoever.
Well, that's basically wanted to share on that side. Now with my client's project, it just seems to get a little more tricky and tricky because now he's adding photos. Well, the photos are often of him and the deceased fiance, who the book is largely about, is about. But there's sometimes other people, and so I'm like, okay, so are those people okay being in that photo in the book?
Right.
Before it's all finished, I think he, whatever, will have to consult an attorney because He's going to have to have more written permissions, I think, because he has so much he's disclosing, so many people, and none of it is derogatory. It's not derogatory against these people, but one in particular does not want his name or anything told about him, and so he had to sort of cover that up and give a new name, and we steered clear of all that. I mean, some people are very private and they don't want that, even if it's not derogatory towards them.
Correct.
I mean, even on places like social media, my own family, I don't put their pictures up unless I decide there's one I want to and I ask their permission. You know, and my daughter will say, it's okay, Mom, whatever, but I still always ask her because, you know, I don't necessarily like it when my picture just shows up somewhere. Somebody's decided to take it and throw it up there. You know, I don't necessarily appreciate that. So there's different feelings in different people. They're like, sure, whatever, but many are not that way. And like I said, even though his aren't damaging, they're actually very positive and uplifting about those experiences and people and places. He is mentioning businesses and people and, you know, maybe conversations and things that went on between them. And there's just a lot in there. It's been a long project and I don't think it's near done because we've got to make sure that's sorted out to where he's covered, you know? So there's a lot to think about when that comes up because, you know, there's nonfiction that's just maybe telling an inspirational story of some sort that's not involving a lot of people. But if you're really talking about your experiences and where you've been and the whole conversations, and in his case, some people who now know of his writing are sort of challenging him that, I mean, it's his truth, it's his memories, you know, but they're sort of challenging him. And so he's had to step back and think about that a little bit. You know, there's a lot to think about.
There is. Shimmery and then Craig, I saw have their hands up. No. Okay. Craig?
Yep. So I had a very good friend of mine. I was helping her publish her book, but she passed away this past April. And now, you know, I have the book, but I don't know really what to do with it other than the family is now asking me to what would it take to publish it. And so I might be working with them. Is there any kind of thing advice you can give me on that end of things?
As far as what, getting releases from them to publish it or what?
Yeah, it's a work of fiction. It's science fiction. And, you know, nobody that I know, you know, I don't know all the people that were in her life. So I don't know if it was based on anybody in her life or not. But I think it could be covered under that general disclaimer, you know, this is a work of fiction and it was done by Pam, this woman who is the author. But is there anything else that I need to be thinking about, you think, in those terms?
I think if I were publishing that, because you're publishing it posthumously, that I would get signed permission from the heirs. Because where is that? The money for that book going to go? Okay, you say it goes to them. I would get signed written permission to publish it from the heirs, all of them, whoever it is. Yeah. And I would keep and then I would make sure that I put in there, you know, whatever proceeds go to you and blah, 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 blah. But I'd get a really detailed written permission to do that from the heirs. And then it becomes really, in essence, their problem. What's in there. Okay. And I would put too that it will not be published without your prior consent and review. And then they would have to review it and then consent in writing if they had reviewed it and then it was all right to publish again. So initially to publish it and then again to make sure that before you hit a final copy of it or before it's released that they've reconsented again, which sounds awful, but you know, such is life.
What about the income stream? How do you handle that? Who gets it?
Well, I don't know how you're publishing, Craig, but it all goes to them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know about that. So I, you know, obviously there's some cost involved. and in publishing a book. So I didn't know if we would split the income stream or if it would just be, they're just going to pay for the publishing and then it's all theirs, or how it would be. So those are things that I haven't had discussions with them about.
I can
TBD.
talk to you about that later, but what I would do, I mean, I can talk to you about that in detail. But what I would do is they would have to pay me for publishing it, and then I would make sure the income stream went to them. I'd do it through Amazon. Where is Michelle? Michelle, are you still here? She's gone. Okay.
I think she's gone.
Michelle might have a different idea, but because she published it. Nance, do you have any idea on that? Craig, you can talk to me about it later if you want.
No, I would just agree with what you just said is, get their permission and release. As far as the money, I don't know, but I was going to say, it turns out that, let me run this by you. It turns out next week, the program we would have fell through. So if you think there's enough that you want to continue this next week, or you have specific questions on your own books, or want some more information that we might dig up this week, would you want next week to be the same topic, or would you rather move on? Anybody have an idea, opinion, need, want?
Well, we haven't touched on how do you get permissions. Is there a standard form? No, the
There are
paperwork.
forms.
I've got some forms that we can look at too, and I can send
Is that enough? Is that enough to fill out an agenda for next week?
Well, there are places online where you can find forms specific to authors getting permission and others. I mean, what do you think, Kim? Do you want to try to fill out some more next week?
Sure, that's fine. If you guys can chat Nancy or me on what some questions are, then maybe we can try to get you the information that you need.
We could bring up some websites where you could find those forms.
Right, and we can also maybe expand on because we gave you a lot of information here. And so an awful lot of information. And so maybe we can expand on some individual circumstances as well. So.
It's after 11. Any more questions, anyone? Craig?
No, I'm just saying goodbye. I got to go.
Oh, okay. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Next time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
so
guys.
much for joining us today. If this topic has helped you out in any way, we'd love for you to take just a second and leave us a comment or leave us a thumbs up on the video. It really goes a long way in helping us and helping the YouTube algorithm know that this is valuable content and to share it to other people. If you want to learn more about Christian Authors Community, we would encourage you to visit our website at authorscommunity.net. We hope that you guys have a wonderful day.